Yes, I was born in Dublin and grew up mostly in England, basically. Dublin was fine when we were young. The family, there is a sort of a thing where the first important family member was an English lord, and he came to visit us when we were children. The interesting thing was, he came to visit, didn't like what he saw, and he said to my mother, he said, "I'm going and I shan't be back." And we never saw him again, ever. But my grandmother, on my father's side, had inherited a lot of information, but he married and they started producing children. I'm the eldest. So that way the family were doing very well, but this man, he dropped us. He decided, I can't cope with a big Irish family with lots of children, I'm off. And we never heard from him again. But there was bits and pieces that kept coming in and out of a relationship. My father's mother, who lived in Dublin, had a pension from the British Army, and it was very substantial. And in those days, you didn't get a pension from the army of peanuts. You know, I mean, it was always either very substantial, which means then it was officer class pension, really big pension. Not a few shillings a week, but rather grand pension. And she was the connection who, they were in India for a long time, the family. They fought in the Indian Mutiny uprising, and they're listed in quite a few books. In fact, the family have the first, this is a funny quote, which nobody would believe if they know military history, but it's checkable, you can check it. My family have the first ever VC awarded to a civilian. Now that, normally, if you know army history, you would say that's not possible because it isn't given to civilians, it's only given to military. So no civilian would ever get the VC, Victoria, no civilian would ever get it. So if you got it, there has to be another story somewhere. And the other story was that this particular Kavanagh, he, during the Indian Mutiny, they were entrapped. And he dressed up as a woman. This is the crucial bit. He dressed up as a woman. He could speak the language because he lived in India a long time. He could speak the language. So he dressed up as a woman and went in and out of the mutineers who were all surrounding this encampment, and he carried messages in and out. If they'd caught him dressed as a woman, they'd have burned him alive. But because he spoke the fluent local Indian dialects, he could get away with it. And he did, he got away with it. So when it was all over, the mutiny was quelled and the whole thing came to an end, they decided to give an award. And they thought about it and thought, well, we'll give him the VC. And then they said, oh, hold on, we can't do that because he's not a soldier. And it's only given to soldiers. Sorry. So we don't give the civilians. So to get around that problem, they made him an honorary soldier for the day. So he's the only man, as far as I've checked in history, who actually got a VC as a civilian, and it's never given to civilians. So the family have the unusual distinction of wearing a dress, going in and out through the Indian mutineers which were surrounding the place, and getting away with it. And at the end of the day, getting the VC as well for being a woman, dressed as a woman. So we're a bit ashamed of that. We don't like to think that he won it dressed as a woman. So we kind of play down. So he's on record having got the VC Victoria Cross for dressing as a woman. So we don't like that bit of the story. So we tend to not discuss regularly.
And what's your what would your earliest memory as a child in Dublin be?
My earliest memory is an interesting one. my father used to take me to out to so-called to church, but he didn't. He used to go down the bottom of Camden Street into an area I don't know very well, and we would meet up with the Indian family who were in Dublin, because the pension wasn't very good in those days. The army pension wasn't brilliant, but you could live very successfully in, say, Dublin with the pension, or you could live in London with the pension. It was substantial, but not allow you to live in, say, Paris or big cities. But it was just enough to keep you comfortable. And my father used to take me down to meet the Indian side of our family. They weren't Indians, they were white who lived out in India for a couple of 100 years, so they were white people. But it was considered in Dublin then that it was rather shameful to be part of the Indian subcontinent. Even all those years ago, it was considered rather not a good thing. So my father couldn't take me. If my mother knew, he couldn't take me anywhere in particular. So to meet up with his Indian family, we'd pretend to go to church, and then we'd take me around the back, somewhere off, I forget now, somewhere off Camden Street. There was a road up the back street, and he used to take me there to meet the Indian side of my family. But if my mother knew, she'd go berserk. She was so against the whole idea. They used to fight about it. So I would promise my father I wouldn't talk about it. So I didn't, of course, as a child. I didn't talk about it. So I just simply got on with living and doing things and not thinking too much about history or anything. And so the way it was.
And what did you do when you met up with the Indian side of the family?
Oh, I met him on Sunday morning, because on Sunday morning we were supposed to go to church.
Mm. And did you just hang out? Did you
and we go around and meet them, and I was quite young, so we go around and meet them and sit with them, and the old family members would all talk among themselves, and I would have to promise my father that when we went back home I wouldn't mention where we'd been, so I didn't. So that's how we got round that problem. And gradually one grew up and they began to die off. I don't know when the last of them died, I can't remember. But that was how we got round the problem. Yeah.
And what did your parents do?
They didn't really have much of a career. My father became very, what I was supposed to call nationalistic, became very Irish. And although he had lots of opportunities given to him by richer relatives, he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it. They'd offer all sorts of inducements to give him a lift out of what they called ordinary life. But he wouldn't do it. He was obstinate and he wouldn't do it. He just wouldn't accept anything. They'd say, look, John, pack up your job. He was driving some flour mills, and they said, pack up your job, we'll give you money to buy a taxi or something to elevate you. But he wouldn't accept it. He was a very proud man and he wouldn't accept it. So that was it. So instead of jumping on a thing that would have elevated him above the common herd, he wouldn't do it. He never did. That was his life. He just wouldn't do it. So we gradually, just got on living in Dublin until I was old enough to get out, and I got out. And I came to London to my English relatives, and that was the best bit. In the meantime, of course, I have a famous Uncle Paul who's a writer, and he worked in the Dublin Gate Theatre. He worked with two well-known people of the day, Hilton Edwards and Michael McLemore in the Gate. In fact, there's a picture of them here somewhere. And they worked in the Gate Theatre, and that was a kind of an intro into meeting a whole new load of people, which was wonderful. I met some beautiful people over the years. As I grew older, I met loads of lovely people. That was quite an experience to meet a whole new raft of people that you wouldn't normally meet. And through my Uncle Paul, I met so many people. I met loads and loads of wonderful people. I mean, went on to become famous in different ways, and that was great fun growing up. Paul was interesting. Paul worked for Michael and Hilton in the Gate Theatre. That's where he worked. And he wasn't big there because they sort of, the wages wasn't very good. I mean, they'd say, tomorrow we're putting on a Shakespeare play, say, Much Ado About Nothing, and we've got £20 to fund it, 20 quid to fund it. So Paul would dress the principal actors and actresses for the £20, and that was going around cheap shops and buying there used to be a very cheap material like Hessian. The dyes were made by what they called Coleman's dyes or something like that. So you bought a cheap dye, you cut the material up for the costume, you invented the costume, dyed it, and then it might be Much Ado About Nothing or Three Gentlemen from Verona. It might be a big Shakespeare production. And they would present it with these little cheap, ordinary cloth costumes. And when it was over, the play was over or finished its run, they would unpick the material, take all the stitching out of it, roll the cloth up and put it away for the next production. They did that every time. And this is Michael McLemore, Hilton Edwards, all the top stars of the Dublin Gate. They were all doing it. That's how they did it. Yeah, so it was great fun. I grew up with it all. I was the little boy who there was a wig woman in off Stephen's Green called Madame Drago. I always remember Madame Drago. She terrified me. And when they finished things, they hired the wigs from her, Madame Drago. So afterwards, you took the wigs. I would take the wigs back to Madame Drago in sacks, cloth sacks. So I would take the wigs back to Madame Drago, and she terrified me because you went up these funny little stairs, and upstairs was a very, very big room, and that's where she kept all her props, all the wigs, the whole lot, and she looked like a witch. She was probably very charming, but when you're a young boy, you always remember the worst. And Madame Drago had the wigs. So I gave back the old one, and I'd have a little list of the new ones they want for the next production, whatever it was going to be. So I'd hand the list over to Madame Drago, and she'd read it and say, okay, and she'd get a sack, fill it with the new wigs for the new production, give it to me to take back, and I was always glad to get out of the place, because it had one of those funny feel, like haunted. It wasn't. It was just an ordinary studio where she worked. But when you're a young boy and these people appear with all their weird-looking gear on, you begin to think, oh God, what have we got here? So that was great fun. And the Dublin Gate Theatre was fabulous. It really was terrific. They put on operas all the time, in season, and all the top opera people used to come there. And in fact, they even had people like Laurence Olivier turned up there lots of times. All the big stars did. In those days, they were unknown. So if they're working in London and not making any money, they'd go to Dublin and work a few nights and do something to earn a bit of money. But they didn't want anyone to know, because they didn't want it on their record that they had to go to Dublin and appear in some awful play. So they didn't want people to know. But I remember Laurence Olivier, for instance. He appeared in, anyway, he becomes the King of England, and he rules, and in the end of the opera, at the end of the play, he's murdered, and he's killed on stage, and that's the end of him. Richard III. That's it, sorry, it's come back, Richard III. And they put that on in Dublin, on the stage in the Gate. And I was backstage with Uncle Paul, because he used to take me everywhere as a little boy. And I was sitting backstage watching what's going on stage, and Richard III, Laurence Olivier playing the role, He never admitted it to anyone, but I can assure you this is a true story. And I sat in the wings watching the action, and the bit where he's killed, you know, he's murdered in that story, and he's killed, hacked to death, and that's it. So I'm sitting in the wings watching this, and I started crying. I was very young, very little, and it's all over, and Lawrence Olivier came over and picked me up and held me in his arms, and he said, look, I'm all right. I still cried because I could see the blood. It wasn't blood, it's the makeup, you know, the makeup paint. But it looked like blood to me, little boy. And he held me in his arms. He said, no, not a mark. So eventually when I stopped crying, he put me down. And that's a true story. That was Laurence Olivier, yeah, doing just that.
And could you tell me about your Uncle Eddie and how he became wealthy?
There's very, very odd stories about Uncle Eddie and his wealth. He was very rich at one point, very, very rich. He bought a house out in Howth, and we never ever really got to the bottom of where the money came from. And it was a lot of money. It wasn't a little amount, it was quite a lot. So the rumour went around that he had been part of a big robbery, a massive robbery. But afterwards, when I tried to track down big robberies of the period, there's nothing very big. So what the robbery was, I don't know. But it was enough in those days to buy a big house out in Howth, employ a couple of servants, and live, as they say, high on the hog. But where the actual money came from, we never found out. It was a mysterious thing. It had to be something very, very big and very unusual. But I searched for years to try and track it down. And the biggest robbery of the period, you know, was nothing. I mean, the biggest robbery of the period was peanuts. You know, somebody might rob a bank, in those days, not banks, but they might rob a pawnbroker's, for instance. But they'd only get a few £100 at most. So this, I'm talking about lots of money, big money, and I never could track it down. Then I thought, well, we did have these very rich English ancestors. Maybe he inherited the money, but nobody knew. It was all rather hush-hush, and it was. All we know is it was an English lord, and it's quite possible that he inherited the money. And I mean, money is very funny in families. I've got a young brother. I did have a young brother. He's dead. He inherited the house, and he sold it, turned it all into cash, and drank the whole lot. And you think, that's not possible, but that's exactly what he did. He sold the house for a lot of money, and he drank himself to death. So, you know, it does happen in families, and it's quite possible that whoever the people were who left us the first lot of money, it may be something like that happened, and that would explain the money. But when the family inherited the money, they didn't drink it to death, they used it. So but I've never been able to track it down. I've tried everything. I've got good friends in England who are good at, you know, tracking things, and we've never found out where the money came from. I think we've agreed now it can't have been a robbery because there was too much money. So it's not possible that it was a robbery. It can't have been. I mean, a robbery might net you a few thousand maybe, but 100,000, 200,000 in Dublin, going all those years, no. So we never did find it. So that's one of the mysteries of life. We never found it. So that's a mystery.
And onto London, when you moved over, you started up a building company. Did you have any interesting projects, or did you do anything interesting in the building?
Yes. Well, the first thing I did, of course, was I worked in the British Museum, and I was in there for about 5 years, and I was responsible for a terrific amount. The central dome of the British Museum, I built it, and inside many of the rooms, I furnished them, refurnished them. I laid floors for special floor, hardwood flooring. I spent a lot of time in there, did a terrific amount of work. And it's still, a lot of it's still there, because I've been there recently to have a look, because they keep ripping things out all the time. So I went back to have a look, and I thought, yeah, that's my floor. And the secret doors are still there, because everywhere in museums, the staff have to be able to move around without people knowing. So you go up to a pillar, which looks like an ordinary pillar, column, you know, and you touch a little bit, and it opens, and you slip in, and you pull it shut behind you. So all museums have that. It's nothing out of the ordinary. It's typical in museums. The secret way for the staff to move around without disturbing the customers. And so I spent quite a number of years at British Museum, quite a lot. And then, of course, I roped into going to Buckingham Palace, where I did lots of work, and yeah, I've done quite a bit. Then I went on then to study architecture, which I did, and all the relative trades, and yeah, do stuff like that.
Can you tell us if you have any memories of Princess Diana?
Oh, I met them all.
Yeah.
Diana was a very, very, very nice person. Probably very insecure, she was. But she was never relaxed. I remember going to a party given by King Constantine of Greece. Gave a big party in his house. And everybody was there, all the royals were there. Everybody was there. And Constantine is a very nice man, he's great fun, and he's a character in his own right. And he's great. We're still very friendly with the man. He gave this great party, and Diana sat in a corner, wouldn't mix in. She just wouldn't mix in. She was sort of sitting over there and around. So I went over to have a chat with her. I met her quite a lot, so I went over and had a chat with her, and I said, why aren't you... Oh, by the way, it was a dress-up party, and I went as an Indian, Red Indian, the whole thing. I heard it, so it looked rather good. And I said to her, why aren't you joining in? And she said, I have nothing to wear. And I said, Diana, you of all people, you've been in every country in the world, you've got stacks of Indian gear, you've got headdresses, you've got a lot. And she sort of said, well, yes, I suppose I have. I said, you could have come looking absolutely fabulous. And she said, well, that's all right. So she sat very quietly. So I did chat to her for a long time, and then I thought, well, I want to get back with the boys, because we were all having lovely barbecue and lovely food and lovely drink. So I went back with the boys, and Prince Charles came up to me and we chatted. I've known him quite well. He came up to me and we discussed costumes, because he was wearing a lovely costume. And I said to him, where did you get it? And he said, I think I'm a chief of some Indian tribe, which he is, of course. So we had great fun. And then I sort of looked back at Diana, she was still sitting there, and people were going up and taking pictures of her, which is very rude. You never do that with royals. You never ever do that. I had a camera, I wouldn't dare do it. It's not done. You don't do it. It's rude. So I watched all the people going up and taking snaps of her endlessly. And then I thought, I'll go and sit with her and chat. So I waited until the last idiot finished snapping away, and I went up and I sat with her, and we had a nice long chat. And next thing is, she's gone, and life turned upside down. Well, you know the history of Diana. The whole thing went pear-shaped, and the wedding went pear-shaped, and that everything went wrong and bad and so on. But she wrote to me a lot. I've got quite a few letters from her, and they're quite nice. She was always asking me how my latest project is, what I was doing and how I was doing. She was very interested in things. She loved information. Didn't matter what it was, she just loved it. She was great for that. And then, of course, you know what happened to her. She was killed. Personally, I think she was bumped off, but you can't say that. There we are.
So that you kind of go in, you kind of believe the conspiracies, maybe? That's...
You know, in the world of big politics and big things, you'll always hear all sorts of information, and I think it's very personal. You want to personally accept it or you don't. Look at Lee Harvey Oswald was supposed to have killed, well, he shot and killed Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald swore he didn't. There was great stories that it was put up job, that he was framed, and all the rest of it. And these are all stories that have gone down in history. You either accept them or you don't. It's like massive stories about the First World War that could have been ended in a week, and there's all sorts of stories about why it went on, when it could have been ended quickly, and this story and that story, and you have to think, some of it you have to really think, do I accept it? And you can either say, yes I do, or no I don't. Either way you're probably wrong, because you can't prove either. And that's what it's all about, really. That's what it's all about. You can't prove either way. So you just accept it or let it go.
And have you met the Queen herself?
Oh yes, oh yes.
What's she like?
Yes. She's a very gentle woman, very quiet. I only met her because every year she gives garden parties, and Annie is the royal nanny, and Annie is always invited to them, and I could go along as well. So you go in and you go round, and it's the food, by the way, is usually absolute rubbish because nobody goes to any trouble. It's token. What they do is afterwards, when the party's over, I mean when all the guests have gone, they then have a different kind of party, which is all the staff have a party. So in that party will only be the royal family and the staff. All the people who work in the palace will be there, and they occupy a big chunk of green, and we go around and do all the dances, the old style country dances, and it's enormous fun. You food and drink, I mean real stuff. The others have all gone, so now you're only with the royal family, and that's terrific fun, because it is fun. You eat lovely food, and you then take part in country stuff like country dancing, and you hold hands and you dance in circles. That is pure joy. That's the loveliest thing in the world. That really is something special.
Mm. And you were telling me before you have connections to a mafia family in London. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Oh, the mafias. Well, have you ever heard of the Corleone family? The Corleone family are from Sicily, the Sicilians, and they're the original mafiosi. And they have a series of shops and hotels and various businesses in London. No, not London. I forget. It'll come in a minute. And they are very interesting people. The men all die off young, you know, because they don't do anything. They sit about. Don't do a thing. Don't do any work. They just sit and eat and drink. And eventually it kills them, because that's all they've done. The women do all the work. Absolutely all the work. But this family I know are the original Corleone family, that the film they made some years ago was based on this family, and they're the genuine Corleone family. Mafiosi from way back. And I'll tell you what, some of them are frightening. They own a hotel, we use their hotel. So I got to know them through this hotel, and they are frightening. One of the men, he sits and he looks at you, and there's something about his face sends a shiver right up your spine. I don't know what it is quite. I mean, I know well, and we've become friends over the years. But you look at him, you think, I wouldn't like to fall out with him. He just has a look about him. And they're the genuine Corleone family that they used in the film. What was the film called?
The Godfather?
What was it called?
The Godfather?
The Godfather.
Yeah.
Of course, it was called The Godfather. That's the film. They made a series of them, and it's based on this family. Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating, these people. And I know them well. I mean, I know them now. When I'm in London and I want to go to a hotel, I go to the Corleones. Yeah, lovely family. And yeah, and they're great fun. But I wouldn't trust any of them. I mean, they're not going to do you any harm because they're in business. They run hotels, they've got some hairdressing salons, and one of the biggest, this sounds silly, they're one of the biggest producers of cucumbers in England. They have vast farms of cucumbers. I don't know where they go. They must have special markets for them. But they're the Corleone families, and they're incredible people. I could always introduce you to them, but I wouldn't, unless you really want to. But then you have to come over to England and meet up with them.
And you know, you have a connection to a hitman, and you say he's very professional and he's never been caught. Can you tell me a bit
Never
about
been
him?
caught. Not a thing. Because he's a genuine... I think the reason he's never caught, like all these people, is they're very, very careful. They don't break the law. They don't do anything silly. They don't break the law. They don't do anything to invite. They won't buy. If you went up to them and said, "Look, I've got these jewels I want to sell you. Would you buy them?" No, they won't. They wouldn't touch them. They wouldn't trust you for a start. So they wouldn't buy them. They're very secretive, and they are professional hitmen. They won't take on a contract lightly, and if they do, they'll have done their work very, very, very carefully before they touch it. And they've never been caught or charged. Nothing. Nothing there at all. And I know them. And over the years, they've gradually grown to trust me because I've become part of it. But the trust is limited to a sort of a, you know, in the world, in Jewish world, well, you may not know this, but in the Jewish world, I've got a lot of Jewish friends who are also hitmen, and they use words to disguise, when they're talking, they use a lot of words to disguise what they're saying. So instead of calling you Fred or whatever, they'll use a Jewish Yiddish word, and that way you're never quite sure what they're saying or what they're talking about. And the mafia is exactly the same. They have words to disguise words. So you can listen to them and you're never quite sure what they're saying or what they're talking about. So they never get in trouble with the law. And they won't do anything stupid. Never. They never get caught because they don't do anything stupid. Nothing stupid at all. They don't take anything, they don't steal, they don't go in for anything. So you'll never catch them for that reason. And that's true. Yeah. The only way you'll ever meet them is if you met them through me. But if I introduced you, it would take about 5 years before they would even talk to you. Take about 5 years. And that would be out of very, very, very regular meetings and whatever. And then they have this language where they talk about you to me, and it's all difficult. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting too. Very interesting, that. But I've never known one of them to be caught by the police. Not one. They don't go in for little petty thieving. They're big, and if they do a execution, it's big. It won't be killing somebody for fun or revenge. Nothing like that. If ever you read in the press of a mysterious killing and there's no information, probably done by one of these people. Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And you know a direct descendant.
But I love stories like that because they just, you know, you think about it, you don't believe it, and so on. And yes, it's always good to meet people who've got interesting backgrounds, or need not be terribly important stuff, but it's, you know, it's there, and there's a story behind it, and that's what makes it interesting.